Well, good evening. My name is Ted Landsmark. I am a professor of policy in the School of Public Policy at Northeastern University. I oversee and facilitate the open classroom, and we are delighted that you've joined us this evening. We will have the opportunity to hear and transfer to our guest speaker tonight any questions that you may have. And I would ask that you post any questions in the Q&A box. Understand that this presentation, as is the case with all of our open classrooms, is being broadcast live and recorded, and will be archived and available for subsequent viewing within a few days after tonight's presentation. I am absolutely delighted to have as our guest speaker tonight our Provost, David Madigan. And I have to say that he is in a position to address some of the major issues that have emerged in and around higher education over the past few years, but particularly over the past few months. We've been focusing on what the future of higher education is in a post-COVID world. And Provost Madigan, who arrived at Northeastern late in this spring, arrived here from Columbia University in New York in the midst of a huge period of transition, not only for Northeastern, but for higher education in general. And so we are thrilled to have him available to express his views, not only on what is and has been happening on our campus and on our various campuses, but also to have his perspective on what's going on in higher education today and what's likely to happen in higher education in the years to come. I'm going to start by asking a question that may not necessarily be obvious, but what is a provost anyway? What do you do? And then I'll ask you to launch into some observations about what's been happening on the Northeastern campus and then in a broader sense across higher education.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ted. I'm very happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be here and to have this opportunity. So what does a provost do? Well, there's what a provost usually does and what this provost and probably many other provosts have been doing in the last few months. So in the last few months, we've been very consumed with reopening. I know a lot more about COVID testing and swabbing and related matters than I ever thought I would. So that's been a key part of the role. More generally, provosts are, the provost is the chief academic officer. So you have, the provost has oversight over the academic enterprise, its quality and its operation. And in most universities, there's some variation, but in most universities, the provost sort of serves as the chief operating officer, so like the kind of right-hand person of the president, so to speak, but more focused on on the innards of the university, whereas the president's often focused on kind of the outward-looking aspects of the university.
And tell us a little bit about the work that you were doing at Columbia and elsewhere before you arrived here. How does one become a provost? How does one become the person who is very often seen as the go-to person on the campus when a lot of really tough academic decisions have to be made?
Yes. Well, it's certainly not a direct route for me. So I grew up in a small town in Ireland, and I never really had any particular expectations I would leave that town. But sort of one thing led to another. So I ended up doing a PhD in statistics, and I was very drawn to statistics because it's interdisciplinary, because it's, you know, by its nature, statisticians sort of naturally their natural sort of home is with other people, you know, analyzing data that other people generate. So I've then had a career, made my career as a statistician, both in the academy and in corporate settings, both in startups and in larger corporations over the years. Yeah, most recently I was at Columbia, where I chaired the statistics department at Columbia, and then I got a call one day that the executive vice president for arts and sciences was leaving, and that they needed an interim, would somebody serve as the interim. And I said, the provost called me, and I distinctly remember it was 11:30 in the morning. I had never thought about a role like that in my life. And he called me and said, well, you know, would I be willing to be interim? And I said, sure, but, you know, can you give me some time to think about it? And he said, sure, just let me know by noon, because we have a meeting at noon and I want to announce it. And that led me to, I spent 5.5 years in that role, and it's not dissimilar from the role of a provost, sort of overlapping role with the provost. And then I had stepped down from that position. I'd returned to my faculty position, and I got a call from Northeastern one day, and I knew a lot about Northeastern already, but I was just intrigued, and I'm very excited to be here and to be part of kind of the next phase of Northeastern's, you know, development and growth.
So tell us about what Northeastern has been doing to prepare for this fall semester. I think folks would appreciate hearing in as much detail as possible what the preparations were, what the current campus life and climate are like, and what you see looking forward at this point. Let's talk about the preparations.
Yeah. So back I sort of began to be involved in April, May, was when I sort of came on board. And you know, we collectively took a decision fairly early that we were going to attempt to reopen, and that, you know, that was not an obvious decision. I mean, it wasn't obvious then; it's probably still not obvious, you know, at this moment. But you know, our thinking was very much guided by the notion that this is not a short-term problem or a short-term challenge. COVID is not a short-term challenge. That, you know, if we decided that we would not reopen, well, you know, there was no particular reason to believe that we would reopen, you know, for a couple of years potentially. So our thinking was very much, we have to find a way to make this work. You know, we can't just roll over and give up. You know, we need to find a way to function as a university in the context of this pandemic, and, you know, to function safely. And we were hearing, you know, overwhelmingly from our students that they wanted us to open, that, you know, the students want to be here, and indeed that's exactly what's happened. I mean, they're here. The students came back. You know, you know, they voted with their feet, and they're not. Some students, you know, stayed remote, but the vast majority of our students are back on campus. So to do this safely, you know, obviously we prepared the campus in terms of cleaning protocols and hygiene protocols and so on, reduced density in our classrooms, reduced density actually all over campus, arrangements with regard to eating and eating areas, with outdoor tents and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of physical preparation of the campus. We also reduced density in our dorms. So we have rented hotel space to allow us to de-densify the dorms. But the key, the real keys to opening are kind of two parts. One is behavior, and the other is testing. So let me talk about behavior first. So, you know, we as a community, we are very much in this together. It's a cliche, but by golly, we really are in this one together. the wearing of masks and social distancing is we now understand much better than we did 6 months ago, is absolutely the key to containing spread of the virus. So we launched a very significant communications campaign with our community to communicate just that. And if this is going to work, we all have to comply, we have to behave, we have to wear our masks, and we have to social distance. That has been a message that I think has been people are doing it. It was well received. I think in general the community understands that this is just what we have to do. The other piece of it, then, the major piece of this is testing. So, every student on campus, actually shouldn't say on campus, every student in the Boston area who's interacting with the university is being tested every 3 days. And every faculty and staff member person is being tested every 4 days. So that's because of weekends. So this is a massive undertaking. The logistics of this are truly extraordinary. So it begins with scheduling of tests. We had to build software to enable the scheduling of tests. We built a swabbing center in the Cabot gym right in the middle of campus, which is, for those of you who have been through it, which is certainly everyone who's a member of the Northeastern community has been there. It's extraordinary how efficient and impressive this is. And then we built a lab. And this is kudos to David Luzzi, the Senior Vice Provost for Research. It was under his guidance, and Jared O'Clair. We built in record time a state-of-the-art COVID testing lab that is now one of the largest in the country in terms of volume. And that had to, we built it, we had it go through approvals, serious FDA and state approvals to be certified as a COVID lab, and we're now processing of the order of 5,000 tests a day at that lab. That's really the key. So we were very concerned about the returning students at the beginning of September, but every student tested on day 1, day 3, and day 5. And indeed, we did see some positives, but then it has sort of tailed off. We're still seeing some positives, and we will see some positives. We are in Boston. The virus is in Boston, but the testing enables us basically to ensure that it doesn't spiral out of. I should touch wood. I said ensure. It's not a guaranteed thing, but unless things get really bad in Boston, we should maintain a reasonably stable situation. We've set aside 500 or 600 beds for isolation beds. We're using a tiny fraction of them right now. But that's the key constraint. Like if the beds that we have set aside for folks with the virus or who have been in close contact, if they fill up, we have a problem. So that's but the testing we're doing, according to our models, which are we have spectacular modelers on campus and epidemiologists, suggests that that shouldn't happen. As I say, unless the world deteriorates dramatically, which of course could happen.
We have a dashboard that indicates how many tests have been performed and how many positives have shown up. To the best of my recollection, as of a day or two ago, there were over 135,000 tests that have been done.
Yep.
And I think it's fewer than 70 positives, something right. Like that. How might people be able to take a look at that?
Go to the Northeastern homepage, and then on the top you will see on the right hand side you'll see COVID-19 section, and then you'll see testing dashboards. Right, it's right there on the homepage.
And given that we have such a large student body at this point, how many people are on campus roughly? About
22,000, 23,000, something like that. Not all every day, but I don't know the exact number, but it's something like, I think it's 23,000 people have signed the attestation and are at least potentially members of the community.
And a significant proportion of our student body is international, so they came in from all over the world, where there were different kinds of testing protocols and the like. What, thus far, is your experience on how people are responding to this level of testing, which seems to be more extensive than has been found on many other campuses?
Yeah, we were worried that people would really, balk at this. At least so far, this doesn't seem to be happening, and compliance is extremely, is very high. And talking to people, this is anecdotal, but just when I talk to people, like I tested myself, obviously, I'm always talking to people in line, I think in general people like to be tested because they like to know. And it's totally non-invasive. It's just the tip of the nose. It's not. There's no discomfort, and you're in and out of there in 3 or 4 minutes. I think it's just very reassuring for all. I find this myself. When I get my negative result back, I'm reassured, and I feel good about it. It actually it makes me always aware too of I need to continue to be cautious. It reminds me that I'm living, you're living, we're all living, in a world where this virus exists. So it's not out of mind when you're getting tested every 3 days. And I think we were worried that people might think, oh, I've tested negative, so I can behave badly. I can party without my mask. I think it may almost have the opposite effect.
So how is all of this affecting teaching and learning? What's the learning environment like? And tell us a little bit about the kinds of preparations that were made academically.
So, yep, great question. So it was clear from the get-go that we were going to reopen. We were going to have the density restrictions on the classrooms were such that we were not going to be able to house every student in a class, all the time. We're at roughly speaking 1/3 capacity in our classrooms. So if you go into them, seats have been X'd out, basically marked out that you can't sit in them. So every classroom on the campus is there's places you can sit and places you can't sit. So the issue then was, okay, how do we facilitate participation by our students? I'll come to the faculty in a second, which is an interesting piece of this. So what we did was, again, early in late spring, early summer, we made a decision to basically equip essentially every single classroom with technology that we call it NUFlex. So basically, it's technology that enables remote participation in the classroom. So there are cameras and microphones in the room, and there's a podium at the front. So that you as a teacher, you go in, you're teaching your class, students in front of you, there'll be students in front of you as there ordinarily would, albeit fewer of them. And then there are students who are participating remotely. So they're in their rooms, or they're at home in Texas, or wherever they happen to be. But the technology is pretty impressive. It's a kind of a high fidelity experience for the remote student. They can participate in the class, can ask questions, you can break students into discussion groups, and so on. And it's a new world for the faculty. And there was a lot of training that went on over the summer, and we had some, the first week or two were a bit bumpy with regard to the technology, but it really works. And so what we do is there still aren't enough seats for the students who want to be there. So we built every piece of this, there are heroes behind every piece of this. So Cole Camplis, who's the CIO, the IT chief, his team built what they call the dynamic scheduler. So every week, students basically, there's a student hub that they built, which is an app. The students go onto this app once a week, and they say for every class, they indicate whether they would like to be in person or they would prefer to be remote. And then the app, basically behind the scenes, an algorithm runs that fairly allocates the spots to the students. So students get regular class time, and we also make sure that they're not kind of that they're getting some class time all the time, across the courses that they're doing. And so then the students get to see on this app basically whether they're in the class on a particular day or participating remotely. And it was an enormous undertaking to make all of this happen. It's also enormously expensive. It's a huge investment by the university. But actually, unlike the testing, which is money we're never going to see again, the investment in the classroom technology, will serve us well in the coming years. And it will enable all kinds of exciting things. And the faculty are coming up with interesting ideas, particularly to do with our campus network. So now all of a sudden, because of this technology, if you're a student in Seattle, on our Seattle campus, you can participate in essentially any course, on the Boston campus, and vice versa. So I think this is going to impact us in positive ways, I think, for years.
So how exactly do you think this will affect teaching and learning in the years to come, and particularly for Northeastern, which has increasingly become a global campus? Does this suggest that there will be courses offered in Charlotte, for example, that will be taken by students in Boston or in London? What does this mean for the future of teaching and learning?
I think it's a game changer for a university that has a global campus network. I think it is a game changer. Now, I don't think you'd want to be a student in Seattle taking all of your courses in Boston. That could happen. It's not that it's impossible, but I see it more as obviously at the Boston campus we're huge. We offer a vast array of courses. So certainly, if you're a student in Seattle, there are all kinds of specialty courses, elective courses, upper level courses that are now open to you. That you could use to kind of add on to your Seattle or London or Charlotte, or Toronto experience. So two other pieces to it actually. One is it offers tremendous flexibility to the students. So leaving aside the global, the diverse campuses, even if you're just a student in Boston, now you don't have to come to class every day. Right? If you've got a job or family duties or whatever are preventing you from getting to class on a Tuesday morning, you can participate remotely from wherever you are. All of these classes essentially are recorded also, so you could listen to it later too, which is a less rich experience. But nonetheless, it offers tremendous flexibility. Another piece to it is it's also flexible for the faculty member. So for a faculty member to deliver a class in this format, they don't actually have to be in the classroom. So indeed, we offered the option to faculty this semester who were uncomfortable being back on campus for one reason or another. We offered the option basically for faculty to do their work remotely. About a third of the faculty opted for this. And those faculty are teaching their classes remotely using this technology. So there's actually a classroom for every one of these instructors. There is a classroom on campus where the students go at the appointed hour, obeying, consistent with the density restrictions, and the teacher is on the screen. The teacher is actually remote. So you've got remote instructor in some cases. 1/3 of the time, 2/3 of the time, it's an in-person instructor. So the instructor could be remote or in person, and the students can be remote or in person. And we're not going to go back. Like we're not going to throw all this away when the pandemic is over and go back to, and destroy this level of flexibility. So this is here to stay.
Is there any precedent for this? People have been doing online learning for a while, but not in this format. So is there a precedent? How did this model come into being?
Yeah, so it's actually been around for a while. So it's people call it hybrid flexible. There's actually at least one book about it. I don't think it's been very widespread, but it is in use. I personally at Columbia taught a couple of classes in this format at one point. That was 10 years ago. The technology we have now really makes this, a terrific educational experience for the student. The quality of the audio, the quality of the video is such that you really do feel like you're participating in the room.
And we're only a couple of weeks into the semester, but what kind of feedback are you getting from faculty and students who are using this new system?
So it was a bit bumpy in the first week in terms of getting used to the technology and how you turn it on and so on and so forth. Things seem to be kind of calming down. We also had some snafus with regard to there were some students that we thought were wanting to be remote, who it turns out were on campus. It's a long story. So some of the rooms weren't even as full as they can be. So we didn't even get to the 1/3 density in some of the rooms. That's been sorted out. But this, in general, the students, the students are very upbeat, and they're very, adaptive, and they are digital people, and none of this phases them. That they're participating, remotely, sometimes in person, other times they're happy, I think, to have the in-person experiences. But this kind of, technology-infused learning environment is challenging, maybe to folks like me. But if you're 19 years old or whatever it is, it doesn't seem to bother them one bit.
And say a little bit about your understanding of what residential life and social life have become. We had a group of students on talking more about their activism than about their life on campus. What's campus life like at this moment, both on and off campus?
Well, certainly on campus, it's during the day. So I'm at home this minute, but I was on campus just now. During the day, it's eerily quiet, and we can't quite figure this out. Like, where are the students? But if you go on campus at, say, 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, especially last weekend, for example, weather was lovely. The place is teeming. Just a lot of activity. Everyone's wearing their mask and generally social distancing. So I think people are busy during the day. They're going to the classes. They're doing their work remotely in some cases, in their room, etc. There's the student affairs team have provided an extraordinary set of activities for the students. So there are all kinds of things going on, particularly for the residential students. Fun activities of one sort or another. A lot of these are virtual, some of them are in person. And there's, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about being back on campus. And we still hear about freshmen in particular who are having a hard time making friends. And technology helps with that, but I guess it's kind of no substitute for a gang of kids hanging out in a room, which they now can't do. So I think that's been challenging for some, but as the student affairs people were telling me this morning, that's always the case. It's not the easiest transition in the world for the freshmen when they come here. And they're obviously in terms of the social media, this is what they do, this is what they know. I think there's, in general, people are just so happy to be out of their parents' basements and actually back on campus.
We have a significant number of first-year students this year who would otherwise have been in a program abroad, and they're in Boston. So Boston is the new country that they're discovering. A number of them are living in one of our local hotels. What are you hearing about life for those students and the kind of interactions that they're developing?
So I think they're all freshmen, right? So in that program, it's NUIN's the program, and it's a cohort of students that should have been mostly in London, but we couldn't proceed with London. It just became too difficult. So the hotel is pretty impressive. And Northeastern actually invested quite a lot in terms of getting it ready for this cohort of students. I think they might have been a little more challenging for them than for some of the students in truly on-campus housing, or the off-campus apartments and what have you, because it's small rooms. So there is we put the regular hotel rooms, but I think there's been huge attention paid to them in terms of the residential advisors are there, they're working with these kids and organizing all kinds of activities for them. So I hear it's going well.
And we also have a significant impact on our adjacent communities: Mission Hill, Fenway, Roxbury, Lower Roxbury, parts of the South End.
Yep.
There were some concerns expressed by neighbors initially, as has been the case in neighborhoods around the other universities in Boston, about what the impact would be of so many students returning to campus, but really returning to those neighborhoods. So what can you report at this point about relations with the adjacent communities and how the students have returned to those?
So yeah, we heard we heard these concerns, and they were legitimate concerns. We've got thousands of students about to descend on the place from all over the country. It's John Tobin and his team. Did a lot extensive communication with community representatives, with the mayor, with city councillors, with state representatives, and so there's extensive communication with the surrounding community. On basically what we were doing and how we were going about reopening, about the testing, and the dashboard that you mentioned earlier that's on the homepage. That was a key part of this. So that has been widely publicized in the surrounding communities, so that people can see what's going on, in terms of COVID in our community, which means their community, because it's not just the on-campus students, but also the off-campus students. We also provided, there's a tip line, which again was kind of widely communicated in the neighborhoods where our students are, Mission Hill and what have you. That has been used so people have phoned in tips about inappropriate behavior or noisy gatherings or whatever. John Tobin's team also has a physical presence in the neighborhood, which I think has been reassuring to the communities. I think the infection rates have been touch wood, have been very, very low. So I think that has kind of certainly reduced anxiety level. I think that has obviously just the facts are in our favor, so to speak, that it's it's okay. And I think the extensive communication campaign has helped. We've tried to be as open as we can. That said, I'm sure there are things we can do better, in this regard, in terms of being good neighbors, because it absolutely was a legitimate concern to have gangs of unruly students, in your neighborhood.
So we're still early on in that process. Is there, to the best of your knowledge, a process for maintaining ongoing communications with the neighbors and the neighborhood about what's happening within the university and what the impacts might be?
So John Tobin is the person to answer those kinds of questions in detail. He sent me a list today, actually, date by date of events that are happening, where there's opportunities to communicate with this group or that group. So there's a lot going on an ongoing basis, in terms of communicating with community leaders, community organizations, and city organizations in that regard. So I think I'm sure we can always do more, but I think it's been a fairly comprehensive effort on behalf of the university to be a good neighbor.
You took a leadership role in bringing together the leadership within the university, faculty and staff, late this summer. And you brought in colleagues you had worked with in the past to talk about the role of universities in cities and the kind of relationships that you anticipate will really be the future of town-gown relations. Could you talk a bit about both what you saw and did at Columbia and what you would anticipate the university's role would be, both this and other urban universities, moving forward in urban communities, and particularly, as is the case at Columbia and here, in urban universities that are located in diverse communities where there are significant numbers of people of color and immigrants and working people who are also concerned about gentrification and other factors that universities sometimes bring with them.
Yeah, so the whole host of very complex issues, in what you've just been describing. At Columbia is no stranger to some of these kinds of questions. So Columbia, as many of you know, is located basically in Harlem. And Columbia has a long history of abysmal behavior towards its neighbors, including, beginning with the physical design of the campus, which basically turns its back on Harlem, literally, with their blank walls, on the outside of campus, parts of it. And then there were, a history of issues culminating in particular in the riots and campus takeover of 1968, which was, not a shining moment in Columbia's history. So starting at about 15 years ago or something like that, Columbia was out of space and desperately needed to expand, and set about building a campus in West Harlem, essentially north of the current campus, so north of 125th Street, close to the river. And that, I think it was apparent from the get-go that Columbia had to change fundamentally if this was going to succeed. And Columbia could not repeat the mistakes of the past in doing this. This had to be, in cooperation with our neighbors in West Harlem. And so that particular effort, so Lee Bollinger, who's the longtime president, led this. But his right-hand person in this effort was Maxine Griffith. Some of you may know. So Maxine is an architect by trade, but was for a long time the executive vice president for community relations, at Columbia. And she basically taught us how to do this. This is what it amounts to, and how to build close working relations with our neighbors in the community, and to carry out what has turned out to be a major development in close cooperation with our neighbors. It's beginning with the physical design. The new campus is completely open and has public facing facilities that are available to our neighbors. So Maxine was the person that I brought to our retreat that Ted, you're just referring to. Maxine stepped down from her position at Columbia within the last year or so. She'd been doing it for a long time, and I'm working like crazy to try and pull her into the Northeastern community right now, because I think we really could benefit from her wisdom. She's I had the pleasure of working alongside her, and she is one of the wisest people I know, and so I'm very much hoping that Maxine will be with us, in the coming years. Alondra Nelson is the other person who spoke, who's the president of the Social Science Research Council. also someone I knew through Columbia, and also someone who was very experienced in issues related to diversity and to community. So Alon has also been helping us with some issues.
But both are African-American women who have been seriously involved with community engagement activities and with building and development activities. In Columbia's building its new campus, what were the kinds of non-academic ancillary activities and takeaways that also came with that development?
So some of it, Maxine's the expert obviously, but some of it was to do with housing and making available housing in and around the campus. A key part of it was a community development organization that basically, essentially the university helped fund various enterprises, businesses and so on, around the campus in the neighborhood, and it has become quite a hub for startups and for tech and for for other kinds of businesses. So that was a key part of it. There's also a community scholars program, which has been hugely successful, which basically invites people from the neighborhood to come and be a student at Columbia and participate in various kinds of programs. And that has produced a kind of over time, a significant cohort of people who know Columbia, who are West Harlem residents, who know Columbia, and it's been a tremendous device to kind of bridge any gap between us and between the campus and West Harlem.
And how does the university as an academic institution, beyond what it has done with the Community Scholars Program, how does the university as an academic institution, in your view, provide services to communities, particularly those communities that may be lacking in educational opportunities, and particularly for the people of color who are emerging increasingly in our communities around universities, and who often need support and mentorship in terms of thinking about whether they can become part of those universities?
Terrific question. It's I suppose a few thoughts in my head. So I mean, the first one is this is the lesson I learned at Columbia, is we have to be good neighbors. So we have to be providing the kinds of services you're talking about, right? We can't just come in and suck things out of the neighborhood. We have to give back to the neighborhood if we're going to have a successful university and successful activities. In terms of the kinds of things that we can offer, so increasingly higher education, this is something I'll touch on a little later. Higher education is is moving away from the 4-year undergraduate degree, ages 18 through 22. That will probably continue in some form, maybe for a long time. But that as a model for education is kind of is antiquated. That you get your education at the beginning of your life and you're done, the beginning of your adulthood and you're done. It's just not tenable. So we, Northeastern and many universities, are increasingly pivoting towards lifelong learning and providing educational opportunities throughout people's lives. Sometimes in their workplaces in collaboration with their employers, but also in the neighborhoods in which we work, which our campuses are. So that increasingly that I think will bind us more tightly to our communities, where we provide to the local communities opportunities for lifelong learning and training and degree programs tailored to the stage of life that people are at. I think that opens up, it behooves us to do this. But it is, this is the way higher education is going to be in the future.
So you would see a role for universities providing education to what would traditionally have been considered adult populations, as well as the traditionally defined demographic. And how would you see that working at a place like Northeastern?
Well, we're doing it, so we have extensive relations with, in particular on the company side. We need to go to people where they are. So if the place they are is an employee of Johnson & Johnson, that's where we need to be, offering our educational programs and services. So we are increasingly working with companies to develop, educational programs. We're also increasingly developing professional education programs, both in CPS, the College of Professional Studies, but also in the business school, in the law school, in College of Science, College of Engineering. The professional programs, be they certificate programs or degree programs or other types of credentials, are becoming an increasingly important part of our product portfolio, if you will, that are offered to people at all stages in their careers. That is where we're going, and it's I think I think it opens up, particularly with regards to the surrounding community. It provides all kinds of new opportunities for people, for us to provide service to our surrounding community.
As a statistician, your work has bridged the worlds of technology and the humanities. Could you talk a bit about the role of the humanities in particular within the context of a university which has become increasingly technologically oriented, oriented towards artificial intelligence and the use of computers? How do you see those fields interacting, and what is it that you anticipate seeing in a Northeastern graduate?
Well, I think universities have become more inward looking than is healthy. And we have tended to focus on kind of sometimes rather obscure, arcane, research agendas, and that then feeds in particular to some of our graduate programs. What we're not doing very well, it seems to me, and it's my basic kind of beliefs, is using the power of the great research universities to tackle the great problems of the world, the problems that we actually need to solve, like, for example, racism or climate change, and so on. I could make a list. The universities are not. Society is not turning to the great research universities to solve those problems, but that's a real shame. That's what should be happening. But if you think about a problem like racism or inequality or climate change, or a list here somewhere, any of the kind of major problems facing mankind, clean water. These are problems that technology cannot solve. Inequalities in healthcare, for example. Technology can play a role, technology can help, but technology alone cannot solve these problems. They're complex problems involving history, involving social networks, involving psychology, involving you name it, critical humanities disciplines. And so I feel personally that this is actually the moment where we need to double down on the humanities and the social sciences if we are going to deploy the great research universities in the way they should be deployed, which is to solve the great problems of the world. We need to have strong humanities, we need to have strong social sciences if we are going to make progress with respect to these complicated problems. So I feel it takes a university, meaning the full breadth of the disciplines in the university. We need to be able to deploy those if we're going to make progress on societal problems. And I feel we're morally obliged to do this. So technology is not the problem. We need to be good. We need to have experts in technology for sure. We need to have experts in AI. We need to have experts in manufacturing and technologies and so on and so forth. But those things alone are not going to get us very far.
You brought up the subject of racism, and I assume you mean both institutional racism and racism as expressed by individuals. Our president, early this summer, issued a statement on behalf of the entire university, saying that we would take steps to address issues of racism. Could you talk a bit about how that is being put into effect,
Sure.
and what the university's actions are going to be moving forward in dealing with issues of racism?
Sure. Happy to turn to that. So, I think the events of the past spring, in this country, and particularly the murder of George Floyd in broad daylight, I think they really do represent a turning point for our country. I very much hope this is true. I've been in this country long enough to know that there have been other moments of kind of collective outrage, but I really do feel that this time is different. And in particular, with regards to the great universities, I don't think anyone believes they were innocent bystanders in this story over the decades and centuries. But we have a responsibility now, it seems to me, to take a lead in addressing some of these issues. When the endemic racism that clearly is around us. So the president of Northeastern made a public announcement in June, listing a set of areas where we would focus on. That led, so what we did was we basically created a work stream or a working group corresponding to every one of the bullets that he mentioned. Those groups worked over the summer. They've produced some recommendations. They're being collated into a single document as we speak. And there will be another announcement from the president, basically, which will be much more specific. And this is the way in which I think the world has changed. So it's one thing to issue a statement and to say, for example, we are going to make the faculty be more representative of the students that they teach, right? Well, that doesn't cut it anymore. We've all made statements like that over the years, but I think we're all kind of, there's a realization that fine words just don't cut it. We have to actually quantify some issues, particularly issues of representation, quantify things and set numerical targets for where we need to be and publicly show progress towards those goals. That is what we are going to do. And that's what kind of gives me hope that this moment is different. We didn't do that before. When I say we, I mean the universities of this country. We're going to do something much more specific, and in a way that progress can actually be monitored by anyone to see basically how well we are doing. They're hard problems to address. It's not easy. These aren't things that can be fixed overnight. But I'm very encouraged by this desire to do it. Now let's do it in public, right? So everyone can see where we're at, and what our progress is towards our goals.
So you would anticipate that there will be quantitative goals set,
Yep.
Hopefully also some qualitative goals set, that there will be some sort of public dashboard, and that that will be publicly available. And let me also just say that in relation to the public who may have an interest in this, there are some participants in this class this evening who are raising their hands to ask questions. And I would just ask that those individuals please put those questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them very shortly. So let me ask another question in terms of students. Just this past weekend in the Boston Globe, one of our students who is an editor with the student newspaper, wrote kind of an op-ed piece that basically says, as independent young adults, we may feel an air of confidence or invincibility, but neither is an excuse to risk another's health. And she then goes on to ask, what does the administration anticipate in terms of student behaviors moving forward, and student behaviors in a way that may then influence how even something like the university's academic schedule may be impacted for this semester or for the balance of this academic year.
So I'm not entirely following the point. So the point being that by opening the university, we are putting people at risk?
Well, I think her point was that certainly there is risk entailed in opening the university, and we've certainly seen that in other universities. But I also read her piece as saying it's up to students to act in a way where there is mutual accountability as among the students, and that would influence how the university itself operates for the balance of this academic year. And as our chief academic officer, I wonder what it is that you would want to see, and what metrics might you use to determine how we move forward for the balance of this academic year.
So in a sense, mutual accountability is precisely what we're depending on. You know, when I said that, you know, we're in this together, we really are, because, you know, if a group of individuals, you know, flaunt the behavior, the rules, and engage in behavior that, you know, that is risky, they will end it all. They will end the semester for all of us. I think the students are taking this very, very seriously. You know, my strong sense from talking to students is that they absolutely understand this, that you know, they don't want to go home. They don't want to go back to their parents' basement. They want to be on campus. They want to participate in classes. They get it, that if we're going to do this, and they've seen what happened. I mean, they've seen what happened at other places. They get it, that their behavior matters, and that they're, you know, that they could ruin it for, you know, for everyone. There's also one student was saying to me the other day, there's also the fact that if you test positive, you know, all your close contacts are then required to be in quarantine for 14 days. That's actually quite a disincentive for I think for a young person to be told that, you know, their bad behavior could lead to their best friends being quarantined for 14 days. Is not something that anyone you know, wants to happen. So you know, in terms of, you know, we're talking all the time about how we're going to, you know, carry out the rest of the semester. Well, and now we're turning our attention to spring, you know, in particular. So you know, a key issue right now is Thanksgiving. So you know, we decided some time ago that we will be open after Thanksgiving. We're not going to close the campus, but there remains the question of you know, students who go away for Thanksgiving, say out of state. You know, what will be the testing requirements if they choose to return? Which, you know, the technology that I described means they can continue to participate in their classes remotely. They don't have to come back. But if students do want to come back, what testing regime do we put in place? And that's a topic that we're actively discussing at the moment. So it's, you know, it's all about safety. It's, you know, if every discussion we're having is about safety. So, you know, if if we believe tomorrow that it is not safe to operate the campus. Supposing there's a huge outbreak in Boston tomorrow. Tomorrow's crazy. Within the next week, say, or something like that. That makes it unsafe to operate the campus and to function the way we're functioning. We will, in a heartbeat, change course and go fully online. There's various kinds of scenarios that we've planned for, up to what we did last March, which is send everyone home. You know, obviously we all hope and pray that it doesn't come to that. But we're, you know, every decision, as you can say, the decisions about Thanksgiving, we're being faced with decisions right now. A number of our peer institutions have decided to cancel spring break. And they're going to start the spring semester a week late, and then just teach through spring break. We're looking at that right now. You know, is that something that you know, that we should do too? And everything is looked. You know, we're looking at everything through the lens of, you know, of safety. Is it, you know, what's the safest thing to do? And by the way, the safest thing to do is not to close the campus and send everyone home. Let me phrase that differently. Not reopening the campus in the first place would not necessarily have been the safe thing to do, because then you've got, you know, many of our students would have come back to Boston anyway, but we wouldn't have been testing, you know, regularly like we're currently doing and providing the kinds of services we're providing for our students. So it is not, you know, it's not clear that, you know, there was no risk, and then by opening the campus we are putting people at risk. It's nothing like as simple as that. There were lots of risks involved in not reopening the campus, and there are risks associated with opening the campus, you know, that we believe, and up to now we are satisfied that they're manageable, but it's a very complex, you know, process. There's a lot of inputs going into these decisions. Sorry, I drifted away from the question you asked.
Well, no, I think you actually answered that, and you brought up one detail that might bear some clarification, and that is to say, the academic schedule for the fall semester runs into the second week of December.
Right.
So it continues for a couple of weeks beyond the Thanksgiving break.
Yes.
And if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that calendar has not changed, but that students will have an option of whether they return to campus or complete their studies online during those last few weeks of the semester.
That's exactly right. In fact, they have that flexibility this minute. Right, so, you know, at any time a student can decide, I prefer to be at home in Texas, and they can continue with their, you know, with their classes. It seems particularly compelling, isn't quite the right word, but a plausible option after Thanksgiving because it's so short. And on all final exams will be online. We're not going to do in-person exams. So that's another reason why, you know, you don't have to come back to take your final exam. That will be online anyway.
So let me ask one other question before we go to questions that have come in from our wider audience. I'm curious about your vision for this university, which for a long time was thought of as the regional university that one attended if one wanted to be part of experiential learning, if one wanted to learn in the field as well as learning in the classroom. And of course that continues, but it's also the case that we now have campuses around the world. We are more technologically oriented, and we have many more students from all over the world. So we're much more a global university than we were even a decade ago. How do you see this university moving forward as it maintains a commitment to a mission which is grounded in a number of local activities at the same time that we are global and increasingly technologically based online?
Very interesting, complex question. So we are not a regional university like we used to be. That's just a fact, right? We are a global university. We attract students from around the globe. We have operations, are not quite around the globe, but in many locations. We aspire, unequivocally to be one of the world's great universities, one of the world's great research universities. That's not just about bragging rights or being, number 6 in some ranking or whatever. That is about what it will enable us to do. So if we're part of the kind of the pantheon, if you will, of the top universities in the world, it will enable us to attract ever more resources and talent, and to have more impact, in the world. So that is our aspiration, and I could talk at length about how we think that we can get there. But so that course is set. That's where we are now, and that's where we are going. That said, we are also a physical university. We have physical campuses where real students come, in person. We have the mothership, so to speak, in Boston, but we have campuses all around, around the United States, 2 in Canada, 1 in London. There will be future campuses. Why do we have campuses? We have campuses to serve students who are physically in those locations. So that doesn't change. And whether they're local to that site, or they come from far away to that site, we are there. We are in a community, and we, as we talked about earlier, we must be part of that community if we are to succeed. So in one sense, yeah, we have become a global university with great ambitions, but in kind of moving towards that objective, we are actually becoming more local in that we are now in more locales and more communities and more neighborhoods around the world. So I think we are different. We are not what we were 20 years ago, and we have different aspirations. We're a different kind of university, but that does not take away from the fact that we're not an online university. We have physical campuses in physical cities and locations around the world, in real communities that we must be good neighbors with.
One of the questions that's come in from the public, and again, I encourage folks, if they have questions, to enter them into the Q&A box, and we will direct them to Provost Madigan. One of the questions that has come in, I think relates more to your role as a statistician than to your current academic position. And that's a question of why there hasn't been extensive testing of a random sample of the US population. Have you seen anything akin to that in your statistical studies?
Don't get me started. We as a country just made so many missteps, in terms of testing and behavior and so on. Testing is the key. It's not the only key. That's exaggerated. Testing is a key to living with COVID. We might have a vaccine. We all hope we have a vaccine soon. There's some promising signs, but then there's issues of how long it takes to get distributed and manufactured and so on and so forth. None of these vaccines are going to be 100% effective. So the vaccine efficacy they're talking about is like 60 to 70% in the one I was looking at today. So this virus is not going to vanish overnight. Testing, however, is the key to functioning. So if we could test, slightly deviating from your question, but I'll get back to it in a second. If we could test everybody every day, we would not have a problem, because there would be no spread. The virus would basically dwindle and over time vanish from society, because if everyone was tested every day, and then the minute someone tests positive, they are removed, they're isolated and taken care of until they're better, one hopes. Then you can model this. Then we will not have an epidemic. The virus will still be with us because there's a period of time when you're contagious before you test positive, but it really would be minimized. Testing everyone every day is not feasible. It's too expensive. Accurate testing every day is not feasible right now. The kind of testing Northeastern's doing is every third day, as we talked about. That's pretty darn good in terms of staying on top of this, but it's enormously expensive. So what we desperately need is, and I'm very optimistic that we will have this within, say, 6 months, is cheap, scalable testing. So if we had saliva-based tests that were accurate and cheap, so that everyone tested every day. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you do your COVID test. And then you have an app that you can show that you've taken your test and you're here. We're done. Then we as a country or as a world can move on from this pandemic, and that is clearly where we need to be. Random sampling of a significant fraction of the US population would have been a huge step forward in terms of understanding this disease and its spread. But it's not going to happen. The political environment we're in, it simply isn't going to happen. One last thing. I think that the commercial world, so to speak, will ultimately drive a lot of this. So I read today, for instance, that I think it was Alitalia, the airline, are going to basically require rapid testing. There are tests that aren't very accurate. You can get with your CVS right now, you get the results in 15 minutes. Alitalia is going to start running flights where everyone has to do that to get on the plane. So I think that's probably going to be a big driver in the coming months, is that major corporations are going to start, if huge incentives, like you're an airline, this is obviously devastating period. And if you can find a way through testing to make it possible for people to use your service, then this will happen and start happening on a grand scale. Universities are sort of in the same boat. Testing is the key. Short of a vaccine or a cure, testing is the key.
And you're overseeing the academic side primarily, but interestingly, one of the questions that came in was around the availability within the university of financial aid, particularly for students of color who may arrive on campus without a lot of financial backing. So can you speak to the kind of financial aid that is now available, particularly to students of color and to working class students?
So the financial aid situation is, we spend, I don't have the number on my fingertips, but it's several $100 million on financial aid. Our goal is to meet the full need of every student, and the devil is in the details. In terms of how we do that and the expectations of contributions from the students and so on. But that the goal is to make it possible for any student we admit to experience a Northeastern education. Now, are we using that financial aid optimally in terms of building a diverse class? I think the answer to that may be no. This is one of the, we talked about the activities going on right now with regard to diversity and inclusion. This is one of the threads, one of the working groups, and it is work that will be going on this coming year. It's a very large investment, if you will, by the university. It's a very large amount of money. How do we use that money and enhance that money how do we deploy it optimally to ensure that we really do have true diversity in our student ranks? And we don't right now. It's not where it should be. We're not alone in this, but it isn't where it needs to be. And I think financial aid and scholarships and so on is a key tool It's not the only tool. There's also issues of how do we attract diverse students, how do we retain diverse students. These are very complex, complex questions. But the financial aid piece is clearly is something we're going to be scrutinizing very closely in the coming year.
And then my last question for the evening, in 4 or 5 years, looking ahead, in your role as our Chief Academic Officer and Provost, what would feel like success? What would you like to see have happened at that point in time?
So 5 years might not be enough, but let's run with it. I would like us to have a university that is thriving at many locations around the world. I would like to have a university where the students, the staff, and the faculty look like the population of the United States or the relevant location that we might be. I would like us to be known as the university that has sort of pivoted towards lifelong learning and experiential learning for all people at all stages of their lives, from cradle to grave. I would like us to be known as one of the world's great research universities, where the research is focused on real world problems, interdisciplinary problems that people actually care about. So that the man on the street or the woman on the street would say, Northeastern is a fantastic place. They're doing wonderful things for the world. That's my goal.
I think that's a good goal. Provost Madigan, thank you very much for taking the time on an evening when school is only in its third week.
Yeah.
And all kinds of questions and challenges face the university and the university's leadership. And I appreciate your being open and frank and available to us this evening. So on behalf of all those who watch the Open Classroom, thank you very much, and good luck for the rest of this semester and this year.
Thank you. Fingers crossed that we'll have a successful semester. It's been a good start. But anyway, thank you for this opportunity. I enjoyed it very much.
We will be back next week with representatives from the Global Resilience Institute to begin a conversation around resilience, and also to further our conversation on higher education. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Provost Madigan, and I hope everyone will have a wonderful rest of this week. Good night.